offered me the job, and I said, well, I've done this pilot. And they said, well, thanks for telling us. Most actors wouldn't do that, but we got cards to play with CBS.
In Hollywood, genuine respect is often hard to find. But Tom Selleck has spent 50 years giving it to one man, James Garner, the mentor he kept close to his chest for most of his career. The man whose quiet words in a parking lot redirected his entire life. Tom Selleck has done hundreds of interviews and talked about everything: Magnum, Blue Bloods, Indiana Jones. But at 80, he is finally saying what he really meant. And it is not a scandal. It is something rarer. Join us as we uncover the truth Tom Selleck finally told about James Garner, the mentor. James Garner's journey to stardom. Most people who watched James Garner on screen saw a man who looked like he had never struggled a day in his life. Easy smile, easy charm, the kind of guy who made everything look like it cost him nothing. But the real story starts in Norman, Oklahoma in 1928, in the middle of the Depression. And it starts hard. His mother passed away when he was around 4 or 5. His father could not hold the family together after that, so the 3 boys were split up and sent to different relatives. James Garner bounced between homes, never staying long enough anywhere to call it his own. That instability never fully left him. He eventually quit high school, not because he was failing, but because a swimsuit modeling gig was already paying him $25 an hour, more than his teachers were making. The logic of a teenager who had spent most of his life fending for himself is honestly hard to argue with. He later admitted, without apology, that he was a terrible student anyway. Then came Korea. In 1950, he was the first Oklahoman drafted into the U.S. Army for the conflict. He served with the 5th Regimental Combat Team, 24th Infantry Division, and when the fighting intensified, his unit was rushed in as replacements to what he later described in his memoir, The Garner Files, as fodder to fill up the gap. He was wounded twice, 2 Purple Hearts. One injury came from enemy fire. The other, which he discussed with characteristic dry humor in interviews, came from American artillery that fell short of its target. He never made a big deal about the service. He rarely brought it up at all. That was part of who he was. What he also never talked about much was what Korea actually did to him on the inside. He came home without fanfare, without any real plan, and without the kind of emotional vocabulary that young men of that era were expected to need. You worked through it. You moved forward. You did not sit around talking about what the war had taken from you. So he did not. But the people who knew him well could see it. There was always something underneath the ease, wariness, patience, the particular stillness of someone who has been in genuinely dangerous situations and knows the difference between real problems and the kind Hollywood manufactures. When he got back, he drifted, worked odd jobs, landed in Los Angeles with his father. Then, almost entirely by accident, a friend who was a talent agent talked him into taking a small background role in a 1954 Broadway production of the Caine Mutiny Court-Martial. He spent most of his time standing in the back, but the lead actor was Henry Fonda, and James Garner watched him every single performance. He did not take a single acting class. He learned by watching one of the best in the business night after night, and by occasionally reading lines during rehearsals. That was how James Garner learned to act. And then, when the time came, made it look like he had never had to think about it at all. Warner Brothers signed him to a contract in 1956. A year later, almost on a whim, he later said he got the part because he was cheap and already under contract. He was cast as Brett Maverick in a new Western series. By the end of the 1957 to 1958 television season, Brett Maverick was the most famous card-playing cowboy in America. Maverick was different from every other Western on television at the time. The genre was crowded with stoic, righteous gunfighters. Brett Maverick was none of those things. He was a gambler, a schemer, a man who would rather talk his way out of a fight than throw a punch. He was funny. He was self-aware. He was, in a word, James Garner himself would have rejected, smart, though he always claimed the character was just who he naturally was. James Garner made it look easy. That was maybe the most dangerous thing about him. When something looks effortless, people assume it is. And that assumption that James Garner just coasted through Hollywood on charm and luck is exactly what Tom Selleck has spent years trying to correct. Everything the smile was hiding. In 1960, 3 seasons into Maverick, when James Garner was the biggest thing on television and Warner Brothers was making a fortune off the show, he walked. He sued the studio for breach of contract, claiming they had suspended his salary during a writer's strike when they had no legal right to do so. The studio had him locked into a deal paying him $500 a week, while Jack Benny and Ed Sullivan were pulling in 50 times that on less successful shows. James Garner said it was not right, and he was willing to bet his career that a court would agree. So, he won. The court ruled in his favor, voided his contract, and James Garner walked out of the most popular Western on television as a free man. It was an act of principle that almost no working actor at the time would have had the nerve to attempt, and it set a legal precedent that other performers would use for years afterward. The industry noticed, studios noticed, and the label that followed him after that, difficult, litigious, not worth the trouble, was exactly the kind of label that gets quietly attached to anyone who has the audacity to know what they are owed and go after it in a courtroom. He did not care. That was also part of who he was. Then came the Rockford Files in 1974. If Maverick had made James Garner famous, Rockford made him legendary. Jim Rockford was a private investigator who lived in a trailer on Malibu Beach, kept his gun in a cookie jar, was perpetually broke, and had exactly the kind of complicated, fallible, thoroughly human quality that television heroes almost never had back then. James Garner won an Emmy for it. The show pulled in massive ratings. And to make it feel real, James Garner did a huge portion of his own stunt work, including the high-speed reverse maneuver that became known in the industry as the Rockford turn. The stunt work destroyed his body. By the time the show was canceled in 1980, he had undergone 6 or 7 knee surgeries. He was dealing with ulcers, arthritis, a sinus condition, and exhaustion so complete that his doctor told him he could not continue filming. His marriage to Lois nearly collapsed under the strain. NBC canceled the show, and then Universal, which produced the series, sued him for $1.5 million, claiming he had breached his contract by refusing to come back. He countersued. He claimed that Universal had paid him a tiny fraction of what his contract said he was owed from reruns and foreign sales. That on gross revenues of around $119 million, his production company had seen only $250,000. The case dragged on for 9 years. When it finally settled out of court in 1989, James Garner had turned down a $6 million offer from the studio before they reached terms he would accept. He said afterward that he could live with the deal, and live very comfortably. He had also undergone emergency quintuple heart bypass surgery in 1988, in the middle of the legal battle. He had both knees replaced in 2000. He broke 12 ribs on a mechanical bull on the set of a Maverick reboot in 1981. In a separate incident, he was nearly beaten to death during a road rage altercation with a former Green Beret. There is a version of this story that sounds like bad luck, but that is not really what it was. It was the cost of being James Garner specifically, a man who refused to protect himself by making himself smaller, who kept doing his own stunts past the point of reason, who kept fighting studios past the point that most people would have accepted a settlement and walked away. Every one of those injuries, every one of those lawsuits was connected to the same thing. He gave everything he had, and then some, and he expected to be compensated for it. And when he was not, he fought back. The man the public saw was relaxed and warm and unflappable. The man behind that image was fighting, studios, failing health, and anyone who tried to take what he had earned for most of his adult life. Tom Selleck saw both versions, and what he took from it was a lesson he has never stopped talking about, even if it took him decades to say it as plainly as he finally did. The parking lot, where Magnum I almost did not happen. Tom Selleck met James Garner before either of them knew what the meeting was going to become. The story Selleck tells in his memoir, You Never Know, starts with a misfired golf shot at a par 3 course that nearly hit James Garner in the head. Tom Selleck never told him. They ran into each other eventually, the way people do in Hollywood, and Selleck was cast to play Lance White in 2 episodes of The Rockford Files in the late 1970s. Lance White was designed as a parody of the perfect, charmed detective. Always lucky, always right. Never inconvenienced by reality in the way Rockford constantly was. The joke was that Lance sailed through every case while Rockford ground himself to dust. Tom Selleck played it with the kind of cheerful obliviousness that made it funny rather than irritating, and the two men got along immediately. There was something about the dynamic between them that went beyond the script. Rockford was perpetually exhausted, perpetually underpaid, perpetually one bad week away from losing everything. Lance White floated above all of it, untouched. James Garner played the contrast with a patience and a warmth that made Tom Selleck look good rather than annoying. That is not nothing. That is a choice a generous actor makes about what the scene needs and then executes without calling attention to the generosity. At the time, Tom Selleck was 35 years old. He had a degree in business from USC, 6 years in the Army Reserves, 2 years in a Fox acting program, and a string of 6 unsold TV pilots. He was someone people in Hollywood thought might make it, but had not yet. Then Universal came to him with the lead role in a new series called Magnum PI, and his first instinct was to turn it down. The original Magnum was, in Tom Selleck's words, this perfect James Bond guy with air hostesses on each arm. Tom Selleck told Broadcasting and Cable years later that the character as written was slick and superficial, and that he did not want to play slick. He wanted to play complicatedly. He wanted to play fallible. He wanted, though he might not have used the word at the time, to play someone like Jim Rockford. So he went to James Garner. They sat together in Garner's van, just 2 actors in a parking lot. One of them at the beginning of something, and one of them deep into it. And James Garner said what he said. He said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if they want you, you will never have more power than you do right now. If you feel like making a stand, this is your chance." The thing about that advice is how specific it is. Not follow your gut, not believe in yourself. It was a precise observation about power and timing, that the moment before a network commits to you is the only moment where you have genuine leverage. And once you sign, that leverage is gone. James Garner had learned that lesson the hard way, through years of courtrooms and contract disputes and battles he won at enormous personal cost. And he handed it to Selleck for free, in a parking lot, without being asked. Tom Selleck has told this story in multiple interviews and devoted significant space to it in his memoir. He described the advice as giving him the courage to go back to Universal and demand a different version of the character. The studio's response was essentially, "Who do you think you are?" You have never even been on the air. But they brought in a new writer. They rebuilt Magnum, and the show ran for 8 seasons and put Tom Selleck among the biggest stars in the world. The two men remained close for the rest of James Garner's life. When James Garner passed away in July 2014 at 86, Tom Selleck's public statement was brief and uncharacteristically direct for a man who tends toward the measured. Jim was a mentor to me and a friend, and I will miss him. In his memoir, published a decade later, Tom Selleck went further. He wrote about James Garner's belief, which became his belief, that television leads are far more interesting when they have rough edges. That the character who struggles is the one audiences come back for. That slick is forgettable. Fallible is human. And humans are what keeps people watching. But the thing Tom Selleck has been most careful about, the thing he kept circling for years before finally putting into words, is what he really thought Garner deserved. What Tom Selleck finally said out loud. Hollywood has a particular way of celebrating people. It praises the ones who play the game. It gives awards to big productions and sweeping performances and actors who transform themselves beyond recognition. What it does not always know how to honor is someone who makes something complicated look simple, and who does it consistently, for decades, without ever seeming to break a sweat. That was James Garner's problem with his own legacy. He was so good at appearing effortless that people assumed there was no effort. He was so naturally likable that critics sometimes treated him as someone who just showed up and was charming, rather than as an actor who had thought deeply about what he was doing and was executing it with precision every single take. The Emmy he won for The Rockford Files in 1977 is the one serious piece of hardware his career produced. For a man who spent 25 years as one of the most recognized faces in American television, that is a thin record. And the reason for it is not that he was not good enough. The reason is that what he was doing was too hard to see. Effortlessness does not read as craft, it reads as luck. And the Academy has never been particularly good at rewarding luck. Tom Selleck has spent years gently pushing back against that misreading. In his IMDb quotes, in his interviews for Blue Bloods, and most extensively in You Never Know, he has made the same point in different ways. That James Garner understood television acting at a level most of his contemporaries did not. That James Garner knew the lead of a long-running series had to function as more than a performer. They had to set the tone for the entire production, the crew included. That how the star behaved on set was contagious, and James Garner took that responsibility seriously. Tom Selleck wrote in his memoir about carrying that lesson directly onto Blue Bloods, that when he got the show, he was aware, because James Garner had made him aware, that his job included the parts that happened before the cameras rolled. The mood, the relationships, the decision, every single day, to make the people around him feel like it was worth being there. But what Tom Selleck has said more directly, as he has gotten older, and more plainly in the memoir than he did in earlier interviews, is that James Garner never got the credit he deserved. Not from critics, not from the industry in terms of serious awards recognition, not from the culture, which largely remembers him as a charming TV star, rather than as the actor who redefined what a television lead could be. In one interview, Tom Selleck said that James Garner was someone people could still take star lessons from, phrasing that was specific and deliberate. Not could have learned from, could still, present tense. As if the lessons were sitting right there, waiting, and the only problem was that not enough people had gone looking. What Tom Selleck finally told the truth about is this: James Garner was not lucky. He was not effortless. He was not just a charming man who happened to land good parts. He was a disciplined, principled, physically brave, legally aggressive, deeply intelligent actor who fought for what he believed he deserved at every stage of his career, paid for it with his health, and then turned around and shared everything he had learned with the next generation. The charm was real, but it was built on top of something most people never saw. And the man who saw it most clearly spent decades trying to make sure others understood what they were actually looking at. Which James Garner performance do you think never got the recognition it deserved? And do you think Hollywood has always undervalued actors who make the hard work look invisible? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.